Welcome to the Creative Community Podcast, presented by Destination Arate. I'm David.
And I'm Mark, and we're building a community of creatives who work together to achieve creative excellence. And today's guest is Drew Schettler. Drew is a professional filmmaker based in Colorado.
Drew joins us today to talk about his top 3 favorite directors of all time and what he appreciates about what they do with their work. And then he also shares what he appreciates about what The Chosen is doing, Dallas Jenkins, the TV show about the life of Jesus, as well as tells us his desires and goals for the genre he thinks Christian filmmaking can move into, which is very interesting to hear. So without further ado, let's get you to our conversation with Drew Schettler. I'm excited to have you back on. I really appreciated our conversation last time, and I know our audience did as well. And so we just wanted to start today, Drew, by asking you, who your top 3 directors are, or top 3 people in the film industry, and why, and how they've influenced you, what you've learned from them, and we'll probably ask you a couple questions along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. And so directors, just the position alone in making a film is obviously he's pretty close to the top dog, right below the producers and everything. But it's definitely something I aspire to do, is be a director and really cast the vision. And they say what makes a good director is someone who can communicate his vision clearly. And I think that's something that I've got to learn. It doesn't mean you have to know every part, like the audio and the cinematography. You have to know it good enough to speak the language, but that's the point, I guess, is you just have to be able to communicate a vision, and then those people under you who are good at that will take over. And so I think the 3 people that I like do this very well. And then they also have some different, I think each of them have their own characteristics that make them stand out. And so I guess we'll start with number 3, and then we'll go down. We'll do a countdown. Okay, so number 3, and this one's a hard one, and I'll maybe mention some other honorable mentions, but I think David Fincher is a fantastic director, and so some of his works that are notable, like the movie Gone Girl, the movie Seven, Zodiac, The Social Network, is maybe people are more familiar with that one. If you watch some of his movies, they're very well laid out. He is known for someone who does like up to 60 takes on one scene or one angle. And I've watched interviews with David Fincher. What he's trying to do is to get everyone at a peak performance. And so if you're doing a sit down talk, dialogue, and he's got camera A here, and basically that's just his one angle, he wants the other individual who's not on camera to also deliver their performance just as well. Even if he does have a camera B, because he wants to make sure everyone's at their peak performance. And he says not just the actors, but the boom operator, the cinematographer, the focus puller, everyone has to be at that performance. And then once you're there, then we move on to the next scene. And I appreciate that in a way that he's making a movie not just purely popcorn entertainment, but it has a little bit more depth to that. And I guess all my directors that I like, they all have depth to them. They're all masters of their craft. But David Fincher, I think I like his attention to detail. And if you look at even some of his shots that he gets in the movie Panic Room with Jodie Foster, he directed that one. He has this long shot that goes through like a coffee pot. It goes through like the handle of it. It goes down the stairwell. I mean, it's like this insane shot. And what's interesting, if you watch it now, you're like, oh, I've seen those shots in other movies. But it's because of people like David Fincher who pioneered the way that now those are more of a standard, that people try to adapt those. And it's fun. The other directors have that same level of influence in the industry, is that if you watch their movies 10 years ago, you're like, well, I've heard those same sounds or that same plot line. It's because other people are copying them. These are the like forerunners of the industry. So it's really cool to see that. So I'd say David Fincher has that attention to detail that I like. And then another guy that may not be as well known, but his works as of late, his name is Denis Villeneuve. I think that's how I'm saying it correctly.
Okay.
So if I mention some of his movies, you might know them, like the movie Arrival.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Sicario, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying that right too. And Blade Runner, Prisoners, and then his latest movie that hasn't been released yet called Dune, and it's with like a huge all-star cast. So that's Denis, like he's the man. Like he's doing fantastic work as of the last, 7-8 years. Just fantastic. And he has I think he interweaves like the art of cinematography with the plot beautifully. So it's not just the action that you're going to see or the big stunts, because he does have some big movies, big budget movies, but he's using like something with a beautiful aesthetic and matching that almost like a branded aesthetic, and then matching that with a plot. And then when you watch it, you come away with an emotion more than remembering just memorable plot lines, or like, oh, remember that moment, or remember when this happened. It's more of like a feeling, and he does that. He kind of permeates that through his films. And so Denis is really talented, and he has a cool name. So it looks like Denis Villeneuve. That's basically how it's in English, but I think he's French. And then my favorite director, hands down, is Christopher Nolan. As many people have heard his name up there with like Steven Spielberg or Kubrick or Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, he's going to be one of the greats, and he's fantastic. And his work, my favorite film with Christopher Nolan is Interstellar. Favorite film with like just hands down best film that I like from him. Just beautiful cinematography. I know that's not just his job, but Hoyt Van Hoytema, he's his cinematographer, his DP, but he just has a way of making you think in the movies. And when you get done watching it, you leave questioning your own reality, like with Inception. And I think what he is an architect. He builds his stories and his plots very meticulously. So David Fincher is very detailed with everything. But if you take Christopher Nolan, he gets in every aspect, like even Dunkirk, which is a historical movie. He did the land, sea, and air. So it's broken up into different parts, and they all interweave together. And that's like Inception or Interstellar, like these parts that interweave. And then his latest film, Tenet, I think is ahead of its time. The stuff that he's talking about, like or the thematic elements that he really brings to the table, that people are like blown away by the action, but a little convoluted on the story, and they're like, you got my head scratching a bit. But I think that's his point, is like, I think it's to let, it's not just to be a surface level movie. It's something to instill a conversation. And I think that's power and influence in movies, that if you watch a movie and then you're still talking about it after you watched it, not just hours, but days or weeks or months, then you've done something. And whether or not it could have been a lot of critical remarks, because if you look at his Rotten Tomatoes score or his IMDb or how many people liked it, it might not be as favorable as his other movies, but it has stirred a lot of conversation, which is pretty par to every one of his movies. But he's my favorite, definitely. Yeah, so the other thing about Christopher Nolan is how he introduces like his music into his film, and how they have just a beautiful relationship. And using Ludwig van Gorsen on his last film, Tenet, was just incredible how he uses those elements. And then he's used Hans Zimmer as well to introduce, I think, a new sound that you've never heard before in a theater. And you go away from it like with sort of a branded theme of music, not just the story or the visuals or the action and the stunts, but something that is like ingrained in your audio library. It's there. And other people mimic that. Like Hans Zimmer came up with the idea, like the big, brass hit, like the boom, like that sound that we all know, like, oh, that's something from the movies. Like he sort of patented that with The Dark Knight.
I actually have a question for you, because I know you recently released a film at Christmas,
Yes.
and I'm blanking on the name of it.
Still Small Voice.
Still Small Voice, and it's a film about music, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. And so I wanted to ask you, like, how did you use things that you admire about those three directors? How did you implement those things when you made Still Small Voice?
That's a good question. I myself, I'm not very musical. When I say that, I don't have like a music ability to sing, but I feel like everyone has the ability to learn music theory, and be able to speak the language with another composer. I haven't gotten to that point yet, but I kind of took a leap of faith to try to lend even on other people's expertise with music. And I knew of a few people that were good with it. And I just had this concept, the plot of a deaf girl overcoming the impossible and singing. Because I mean, if you're deaf, like, well, why would you sing? It has no relation, it has no emotion to you, connection. And so I felt like that was really what I was going for. And then the music part of it, obviously we all love, music connects with us, but how does someone who's deaf connect with music? And I thought that would be an intriguing plot line. And I thought it connected with the story of the gospel in the sense of, like, how does a holy God redeem sinners? How is that possible? Why would he do that? And I feel like the metaphor there is strong between the two. And so that's sort of the plot. And I think the influence of the directors, I honestly, I did not think about how it influenced me too much, but I think there's an accumulation of influence. How I'm trying to shoot something like Christopher Nolan, or I'm trying to pattern it. I always think like Christopher Nolan in the sense of structure. I always try to make something where you, maybe not a jaw-dropping moment, but a moment where you're like, oh, I see that now. Oh, that makes sense. I get it. And it kind of comes full circle. I think David Fincher has moments like that in some of his movies where he's very good at holding suspense. So that, hopefully that answers your question a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a follow-up for that too. You talked a lot about how the great directors are inventing things and how that everyone else copies. And my question for you would be, when did they, as the master directors that they are, transition from copying to inventing? At what point do you gain, like, what did they do to be able to gain a level of accomplishment where they're no longer copying the directors that they love, but they're inventing? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. Really good question. Like, basically, how do you branch out and be original, right? Because art is so subjective. So you can make something completely inventive and that no one's ever done, but no one likes it. So how do you branch out to that? And I think it's part of like our culture and our psyche. Like if a director who has clout and merit creates a film that is completely original and nuanced, like we've never seen before, we would all love it because he has that credibility. But where is your question? Where did he build that credibility to be original? And I think it almost, like, to maybe make it mathematical, it's like ratios. It's like if you've got to be 80% mainstream and 20% original, and that 20% catches some people's eyes, and then the ratio decreases from being mainstream to more original as you grow a little bit more credibility. That would maybe be more of a mathematical way to answer it. But I think, like, I always like to know how people got started, like the greats. How did Christopher Nolan start his career? Where did they all start? And they, like, a lot of it isn't just luck, or like you win the lottery at Hollywood or anything. You are good at what you do. And there is a small measure, like, producers or executive producers are good at seeing what makes a director original. And they say, even in his film with $500,000 or $1 million, which I think his first movie was The Following, there was such a unique structure and organization that was still palatable. Like it wasn't like completely out there, but yet it still had a sense of origination to it. And I think that's, as a director, that's how you're going to get your name recognized, or of any artist, isn't just like, oh, let's follow the cliche, wide is the road of being cliche with things, and then try to be a little original here and sprinkle my little originality. It's like, you can be original, but still make it digestible to your audience. And that's, I think, part of achieving success and trying to figure that out. And again, art is subjective. And I think as an artist, if you want to thrive, not by finances, but thrive internally, like, hey, I'm doing a good job, is you kind of have to be doing it selfishly, almost like for yourself. And I wouldn't say that like apart from like just Hollywood in the industry, is because you can't do it for other people. If you do it for other people and they don't like it, then you're a disappointment. But who's to say they're right with not liking your stuff? Because I think an artist has pretty good measure of confidence and says, I like it because I like it. And if you like it, great. And if a million people like it, awesome. But I'm just going to do it because I enjoy this. And I think, being that's what makes someone kind of original. So maybe the word selfish isn't right, but it's like you're doing it regardless of what other people say. So.
And that is a great, I think that's where I, as a visual artist, try to figure out, how do I justify my belief in the others centered view of the gospel with that internal need to be like, yeah, but I need something that keeps me fueled. It's a strange thing. And I don't know if in your own personal work you've explored that at all, or have any insights. I would be really intrigued to hear your thoughts on that, because it's something that plagues me like even daily.
Right. So you're asking, how mainstream should I keep it to make it, like, I mean, I'm delivering the gospel, or I want to serve and minister to other people, but yet it's not really like what I'm, I guess, conveying isn't as like appealing to me. It doesn't really, put a fire under me necessarily.
Right. How do I justify my own personal taste with the other-centered nature of the Christian life?
I think you'll find that there are more people who have your personal taste than you realize. And I think like you can't shoot for the masses in one sense. You have to shoot for, like, God created you a certain way and with certain tastes, and he gave you that. And in essence, we could use it as a calling. Excuse me. Like the Spirit of God is literally, he's moving you down this path, this direction, because he wants to reach a certain audience who finds value in faith, or learns things about the character of God, or about their own self, their own depravity, or whatever it is, to draw them closer to God because of the way you're communicating through your art form. And that's how I've justified it, in a sense, is I could make a message that is for the masses or the mainstream, or I could do it how what really moves me closer to God in a form of art, like what really draws me. And that is depth. I find if I have layers and complexity to something, I find really a lot of value to that. The more I learn about, let's say, like a car and the mechanics of it, you develop a value and an interest in how a car works and combustion and the engine and all of that. So you appreciate it more. So if you take just something simple like that and you intensify it to the complexity of the divine, God himself, that's how I find value. So there are other people out there. We've got 7 billion people we're trying to reach. And I think God calls us he calls us to reach them all, but not one for all, if that makes sense. It's like you reach who you're going to reach, and you just got to do you, kind of thing. And doing you doesn't mean anything you want, because we're still following the same principles from God's word, but then there's still desires that he places in your heart that you say, I like this, and someone else I'm sure will love this. And your passion for that will spark an interest in other people, whether they had that passion prior or they already have that. And then you build that relationship. And I sat down with my dad and I showed him that movie, Still Small Voice. And he said, the gospel wasn't, he loved it. He loved all of it. He said, but it's not as like overtly like conveying like a message. Like someone didn't bow and pray and accept Jesus as their savior. And I said, honestly, Dad, And he was all for it, but I was just saying, like, this is how I would want the gospel shared to me. And so that's why I made the movie. I didn't make it so, like, how would you want the gospel shared to you? Because I think when you do that, then you open sort of like, well, everyone wants the gospel shared to them differently. And it doesn't really matter how it's shared. All you got to do is believe, right? But I think there's a passion in your heart that says, I believe in God and Christ as Savior, and I believe and I worship him in this sort of way, in this manner, and I love doing this, and that will gain other people's attention. So you can't worry about other people. You kind of just got to stick with the passion in your heart to convey that, if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I have a little bit of a transition moment here, but I wanted to talk about two of your three favorite directors, Sorkin and or not Sorkin. Sorkin's the writer that did Social Network.
Yeah,
Fincher.
I had him on the list too. Aaron Sorkin, he's also directed two movies that were one of my favorite. I was like either David Fincher or Aaron Sorkin, which one, you know, because Sorkin's more of a writer, but yeah, he's really fantastic.
But Fincher and Nolan, they both have a tendency to tell stories that, well, they both have a tendency to make movies that things are happening. They show you something that happened before, and they show you that something that happened after, and then they show you something that happened during, but they don't tell you, like, they a lot of times won't tell you, unless it's like very small Batman falling down a well, you know that happened before, but they don't really tell you the order that things are happening in until they reveal it, you know, as the movie starts to climax. And I thought that was interesting because something we wanted to ask you about is The Chosen TV series by Dallas Jenkins. And that's what he is sort of doing in several of the episodes. He will show something that happened before, and then he'll come back to when Jesus is on earth, and then he will show how those two things start to wind together to the point where this person meets Jesus, and here they are. And so I wanted to ask you, as a filmmaker, when you watch a couple episodes of The Chosen, what is it that Dallas is doing that's keeping the the art from being distracting? Because a lot of times, we talked about before we had this conversation, a lot of times faith-based films or faith films can be distracting. Either the actors are a little bit distracting in the way they're doing things, or the filmmaking style is a little distracting. I can remember watching one that looked like they had just filmed a stage play, so everybody was waiting for go, and then they would take off, and they forgot to edit that part out. And you know, and so what is it that Dallas is doing? Because when you watch The Chosen, you're like, wow, this is professional looking, this is professional sounding, this is excellent acting, like excellent story. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the number one thing watching it was how real it was. And when I say real, I mean you read these stories, whether you have been brought up with church all your life or you don't believe in God, you kind of know, like, okay, there's a Bible character named Jesus, and there's like cultural cliches with, you know, what we believe God to look like or heaven to be like, or when Jesus was on this earth, his long flowing hair, and he just kind of floated with some sort of aura and everything. And what I think he did so well is he put context to characters. He gave them backstories, that plausible, as he says, plausible context to their situation and what they were going through. And I think what it did for me was, a lot of times when you read the Bible, sometimes you don't understand why Jesus is saying something, and why he says it the way he does, or maybe why a disciple would ask such a dumb question. You're like, why would he ask that? Or why would Peter deny Jesus so easily? Or what's going on? And he giving those plausible backstories to the disciples and the followers of Jesus makes a lot of those verses and chapters kind of make sense. And whether or not those things actually happen, or Peter had this issue or that, or what, we don't know, but it makes it like, oh wow, the Bible isn't just a bunch of good proverbs by Jesus or principles to live by. These were actually real people. And Jesus, the Son of God, being God himself, was actually a real man who had flesh and blood. And I think that's, in my opinion, what he has done so well, is made the Bible real. It's like it's not just a storybook, which it wasn't, but it's so easy to fall in that category after you hear story after story again, and you get this sort of flannel graph vision of what Jesus might be like. Or the Mormon church has put a lot of Jesus films up recently that are really well made with good sets and costumes and acting, but the way they portray it is like Jesus is almost like this perfect little angel, and he just kind of floats in the midst of everyone, and everything's perfect, and he speaks with a British accent, and it feels a little off. Whereas The Chosen is raw, it's gritty, and I think I like that because that's what it wasn't perfect in the sense of every conversation was perfect and the disciples were just these perfect little followers and everything. And I think it gives it good context.
No, I think that is that's right on. I don't really have a follow-up for that. I feel like you answered it. The question I think that maybe I would have for it if I did have one would be like, is there anything that you're noticing as a cinematographer in the episodes that you've seen or in the behind the scenes footage that you've been watching that you would say like this is setting him apart from, Pure Flix or from, someone else? Is there anything that you're seeing, techniques that he's using or things like that?
I think from season 1 to season 2, I think it's gotten better. And cinematography, there's a difference between like being technically good and then having an art form to it, and then being original, like we were talking about. And so I think at our absolute mediocre, Christian films should be technically good. And I find, and not to put any sort of damper on The Chosen at all, but I find it in between technically good and originally great. Like it's just above the technically good line. I don't really see it beyond that. But to me, like that technically good is pleasing. A cinematographer will say this. They'll say, if you notice what I'm doing, if you notice the camera, if you notice the shot, then I'm not doing my job. If you don't notice me, I'm doing my job. So it's kind of, I guess, a hard question to answer is, there can be shots where they get that are like, well, that was great for their budget. Because that's the other thing is a lot of these cinematographers are getting shots based off their rigs or the number of extras they have. And The Chosen is still pretty small compared to a Hollywood level film. I mean, Nolan's latest film's like $250 million. And I don't know what The Chosen's budget's at, but it's a lot smaller than that. And so there's still some gap there that you have to kind of take into consideration. But I think that there are some times, maybe it was just season 1 where I felt like the camera was a little too shaky. I'm all for camera shake and handheld movement because it feels organic. I love it, but it felt a little too distracting. And when I say distracting, it means you notice it. You're like, why is that? And so when you don't notice the camera, that means they're doing a great job. And I think a cinematographer's ultimate goal is just to keep a feel and a brand and aesthetic. And I think they're doing that well. So, I mean, I'd give them, and here am I saying they're better than me, that's for sure. But if they're, up here and like, are they, rivaling some of the greats in Hollywood? I wouldn't say that necessarily, but they're doing a fantastic job and better than I've ever seen any other Christian filmmakers do. In the sense of storytelling, I would say that's like an A++, they're doing fantastic.
Well, that's so interesting because it's almost, I love that idea of the cinematographer being invisible, because it's almost like graphic design. Like if you ask, what did Coke do well on their latest ad campaign? You'd be like, well, hopefully they did everything well. I wouldn't be able to point out like, oh, they used good fonts, like A+ on the fonts, Coke, like that's just kind of built into that. So that's super interesting that the cinematographer is almost like a graphic designer in that he is meant to be invisible.
I would add one thing, because I recently filmed where The Chosen was, where parts of season 1 and season 2 were filmed at Capernaum Village or Capernaum Studios, that's what it's called. And it is hard to film without like without electricity, like without the concept of electricity. So film at night without electricity. So you're filming by candlelight or motivated candlelight. So I would give them that. That's a hard thing to do. So if you're looking at anything in like, the Revolutionary War, or the colonial days, or like, back to the French Revolution or something, like a movie like that, or Bible times, they didn't have electricity. So how do you light that at night? And I think, that takes a lot of work and a lot of technicality, because you still are using artificial light, but you're trying to figure out how to use it, but keep it motivated and feel natural. So they have done a good job with that at night. Very good.
And I think one of the things that he's done well is, and I'm thinking of just the 2 season premiere episodes, because season 1, episode 1, just comes in with this demon possessed woman, which has been something that's been tackled by filmmakers before, but the way that he just decided to open this 8 season series about the life of Jesus with this woman, um, is not, it definitely was not expected, and definitely makes people like talk about your show. And then the way he opened season 2, I thought it was like The Office, like we were having these like talking head interviews with each of the characters. And so I want to give him credit for that, in that he's definitely doing things that make you talk about it, because, or at least make you think about it again after you're done, or make you go, what's going, like, you need to keep watching to see, like, is this going to turn into what I think it should turn into, or is it going to stay like this? So he's definitely doing a good job of keeping you interested, at least in his premiere episodes.
I will say with Dallas, like his dad wrote the Left Behind series.
Right.
Yeah. So he has a little bit of background of, creative thinking and all of that, but he's made some other movies that, back in the day or whatever, that were not as good. He was an aspiring filmmaker, and he had a director friend who is in Hollywood, and I can't remember his name. And I know he's made some big like a movie with Keanu Reeves, and like he's a big director. And Dallas Jenkins would show him his films and say, hey, here's what I made. What do you think? And after a few films or whatever, he said, honestly, Dallas, you're a terrible filmmaker. And he said that never that sort of, I guess, mentorship or criticism put a fire under him that made him into the filmmaker he is today. And he said at that point, when he was told he was terrible, he studied filmmaking, he studied every aspect of storytelling, and he tried to be the best filmmaker he could be. Fast forward a few years, he made a film, and I can't remember what the name of it was, but he showed his director buddy this film, and he said, the director friend said, you're finally a filmmaker. That's what he said. He said, you're not one of the greats. And I'm pretty sure he said that. He said, you're not one of the greats, but you're finally a filmmaker. And I think that goes to show you, one, how hard it is to be that. And so it's easy to criticize other Christian films out there, but it is hard to make things good. And I think what makes something good is when you don't recognize it's bad by being cliche or cheesy or corny. That to me that's the only thing of what is a bad film, is when it's like, the story wasn't good, bad acting, camera was too shaky, whatever it was, after that, you can watch any film and like, yeah, it was great, even though that's not my favorite genre, but it was good because the plot was good, or like whatever. So, Dallas, I think where and why he is what he is today is because of that tenacity to be great. And I think if you're watching this or listening, that you've got to have that tenacity to do, if you want to make that difference, I guess, in something beyond yourself, you've got to really study it. It's going to take a lot of work. Let's just say that, a lot of work, but you can do it. You can do it.
Yeah, and you talked about the filmmaker that told him, you're a terrible filmmaker. And this is another one of those like things that I think as a Christian, you're trying to justify, like when giving feedback on someone's artwork, their film, their graphic design, their piano performance, anything. Where do you draw and navigate that space of trying to give constructive, good feedback and being encouraging, like the idea of love, like, oh, it's not very loving what you said to me, because maybe you were a little critical of what they had, what they were doing. But then how would you navigate that space of being brutally honest, I guess our culture would call it like tough love, and justifying that with like no, you got to be encouraging, like we got to encourage people, like, block out the haters kind of lingo.
Yeah, I think every relationship you have to test the waters. I think with Dallas and his friend, they were to a point where he could just be honest with him. And I know the other day I was watching a video of Dave Ramsey, which is totally disconnected, but the way Dave Ramsey relates to his callers, he said this. He said, as an uncle, this is what it like. You're stupid. You're a cheapskate. You're whatever. He said, but as a father, this is what I would tell you, son. You're doing a good job, but this. So I think there comes a point in every relationship, if someone's really like, I'm the greatest, I'm the best, I'm gonna be the best, that you kind of have to say, either if it to the point of the conceit it is, that you kind of just have to say you're not actually. Or if someone's really down on themselves, like, I don't know if I'm the best, or like, I don't think I could be one of the greats. Like, man, you've got the potential. You keep working hard. You could do that. So you kind of have to play with every kind of situation. I know for me, I always look at what I do as pretty bad, which I say is good, because then that means I'm growing, in my opinion. Is if I look at my work as bad, that means I'm getting better, because that means I'm, and you don't want to get to a point where you won't create anything because you're discouraged by everything you do, and you're just a perfectionist. But comes to a point where you're like, okay, I finished it. It's the best I can do it. And then 1 month later, you look back and like, wow, that was bad. But that's good, because you're getting better, I think. Because it's just, yeah.
No, that's good. And I find a barometer for me is if someone asks me for an opinion, then I can be honest with them. If they didn't ask me, then I shouldn't volunteer it. If I don't like something, I don't need to just voice that I don't like it. But if they come to me and say, what do you think of this? I can say, well, here's what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. And I was thinking about that in terms of the internet. Like if someone puts a video out there of how to change oil, then that's their opinion on it. But if someone goes in the comments and is like, you didn't do this right, it was like, no one asked you for that opinion. You know what I mean? Yeah. But if the guy in the comments had said, should I have done this differently? Then, so I don't know. That's my barometer. But well, hey, Drew, this has been fun. I wanted to finish, and we wanted to finish by asking you, like, if you had like unlimited budget, like someone just handed you a mountain of cash, is there a story out there you're itching to tell? And do you have like a wish list of people you would cast for it? Or you have any goals like right now? Like when I get to be this sort of filmmaker, I'm going to make this story. Or I wanted to ask you, just kind of let you kind of like run wild with your imagination or whatever.
Yeah, I might have a few stories in mind. I think this is more of a generic answer for me. And that is, I want to say that Christian films, where we could take them and still make a kingdom impact, is into a certain genre. So this would be my answer, is
okay.
Instead of a story, it would be a genre of suspense / thriller, but not a horror movie, but something that is suspenseful. And I think that's really hard to navigate when you first consider, like, well, how are we going to make an action-packed film and be Christian? Or what are we going to do? Like a thriller movie? Like someone's going to come kill someone? Like, well, you can't do that, But I think there are some elements that, honestly, if you tried to make a movie for every story in the Bible, you'd have some pretty tough ratings, and we wouldn't be allowed to show those to our kids, right? So the Bible itself has some pretty deep content, which is reality. I mean, that's what happened, and that's the story that's in Scripture, and we give it with a certain context. Now, to use that more as a parallel, is that with end times, I think, is something that interests me. And I'd like to make a movie not in direct relation to what the Bible says will happen at the end, or Judgment Day, or the tribulation and things like that, but more of kind of a little bit more generic in the feelings that you would have if the world came to an end,
Okay.
if Christianity was outlawed,
Yeah.
if the Bible was a book of hate, if just exploring some options of what if Christianity had to go underground? What if the world economy just completely collapsed and there was no more food and water? What if Christians could come up with some solutions and a colony that could almost restore the earth and yet do it from a biblical foundation? And there was still a faction of people that tried to destroy Christians and they had to worship secretly. That's suspenseful. That's something, and you could throw some mystery in there. Yeah, I mean, you could throw some stuff in there that's some exciting stuff, more than just the story of a family living in 2020 or 1990, and someone gets sick and dies, and their source for hope and comfort was God. That's a story that's been told a dozen times. Now I feel like let's break out of that, use maybe even some of those same elements, but enter a new genre of maybe some suspense and how we could do that, but yet in a pretty clean way. And I wouldn't say like, is it family friendly like DreamWorks, Pixar animation status? No, like there's a reason why we have children's church sometimes. It's like, all right, this is the context for the kids, or a youth conference is a little bit different than so I think there's movies that won't be for 12-year-old kids, and that's fine. And that goes to your point about art, and should I be reaching for the masses, or who should it be for? And I think there could be a group of people that maybe are more in the adult category, that could just really enjoy this film as an entertainment, but also consider things, because I think sometimes God might be looked at as a little too wimpy, or Christians might be too wimpy. And I think when you look at some of the elements in scripture, like there's a lot of boldness, there's a lot of fear and terror, that can really only be consoled by God himself. So what if you actually brought fear and terror beyond someone just getting sick or getting in a car accident, but something a little bit more, a little bit different, where you have to band together as a Christian group? I think that'd be a cool story. And so that's what I would aim for.
Yeah, finding that balance between surviving at all costs and yet loving your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the crux of that story, probably.
Yeah. I think creating a world too, I think that's what makes a good, Star Wars does that.
Yeah.
James Cameron with Avatar, things we've never seen before. And then other people kind of copy those things. But I think even you make rules to that world, whether Christopher Nolan did that too with Interstellar. See, what I like about Interstellar was they open up and like everyone's growing corn and crops, but why? And you don't know why, but you come to a context of a world where things didn't go so well, and then everyone had to become farmers, and they didn't steward the earth correctly, and then it was just a giant dust bowl of some, and so you don't know, but the ambiguity is there, and you kind of fill in the gap. So I think you could do that with a Christian story of kind of drawing to a point here, and you can actually do some movies that go before that, just like Star Wars does, and some prologues and things like that would be cool. But
wow,
I know of a book that was written, it's this thick, I haven't read it, and it's about the new kingdom, the new heaven and earth, and it's really it's really fascinating. What I've heard about it, what the author told me about it, is just the characters and the stories and everything is so new there. It's different. It's not fictional, but it is fictional. Like it's based off of a fact in the Bible, or what the teachings of the Bible, but then it like kind of expands this world of different creatures or different levels of servanthood to the kingdom, to the king, and how that would work and what that would look like. But I think things like that is interesting, whether it like Chronicles of Narnia or Lord of the Rings. that stuff came from more of a biblical worldview. What if you create stuff like that too? More of that.
Man, well, David, we will have to be on the lookout for our second pile of cash. We have a pile of cash we're looking for Armand, and then we have a pile of cash we'll be looking for you. And then I have a friend who I'm also looking for a pile of cash for. So
there's not very many of them.
Yeah, someone is hiding that money tree from us very well.
Yeah.
So, well, Drew, thank you so much. Share again, like your film company that you have, and then if people can watch your films, like where they can watch them, and I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, so I started in 2018 a film company called Meridian Films, and our purpose is basically to use this medium of filmmaking to share the message of Jesus to other people, and we do that corporately or weddings or churches. But we do my passion projects are films and short films, and I've been able to partner with a church to make some films, and so you can watch those on meridianfilms.com. You could look it up on Vimeo or YouTube, or just type in my name. But if you'd like to know more information about that, the internet, Google search is the best way to do that. So check that out if you can.
Once again, we are super grateful to Drew for joining us on the show this week. To hear more from Drew, you can listen to episode 84 of the Creative Community Podcast, which is when we talked to him the first time. And then you can follow him on Instagram at Meridian Films, and you can stay up to date with his film projects and see what he's been working on recently.
You can also subscribe to us, the Creative Community Podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and YouTube for more episodes like this one. And leave us a review or a comment with your favorite part of this episode. And if you liked what Drew had to say, feel free to share it with a friend that you think might also benefit from his perspective on filmmaking, being a creative, and sharing the gospel.
You can also connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, Destination Arete, ARETE, for more interviews like this one, as well as information about our community activities and upcoming Arete projects. So we will be back in 2 weeks with another interview, and we cannot wait to see you then.